Okay, welcome back to Season in Review for PSL Season 2. Today we're covering the Tourian Shields, captained by Daniel Moore. Uh, his team ended with a record of 7-7, which was the league's only 500 team, aside from myself and Ethan. And and
Clear third.
yeah, clear third. Maybe not impressive, but clear third, better than the field. Um, his roster consisted of a first pick of Latios, followed by Magnezone, Excadrill, Dragonite, Gyarados, Milotic, Slowbro, Roserade, and finally rounded out with Bisharp, Crobat, and Darmanitan. So he got, and what is, I think, in my evaluation and probably yours, the best Pokemon in the gen at like the fourth or fifth pick of the draft,
Yeah, Latios
which
was a nice pick.
was a
He did his
steal.
homework.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then followed it up with one of the two ways that Pokemon can be built around in a really effective way, which was drafting Dragmag, got the Magnezone second, and at the same time secured a great spinner in
Excadrill, yeah.
Excadrill, probably the best spinner. It depends on your
Yeah.
team. Starmie can be better, but I think in most cases the best spinner. Then got another Dragon, which is all you need. You don't need to draft more than two. And
I would have
then
liked to have seen a third, to be honest.
a third
But
would have been nice, just to like offer different looks, but yeah. Granted, some of the issues we'll go over later with his draft. I think that's valid. But I think the real flaw, the questionable part here, is in the role players and in the lower round picks, because they almost none of them contributed in a meaningful way to any of his wins.
I guess Darmanitan killed
Yeah.
a couple of Pokemon. That's worth something.
But yeah. After so like moving on from that, do you want to point out any of the games in particular, or any overarching themes before we get into particular games?
I would say that I particularly in the second game versus you, he didn't want to play the hazards game. He didn't ever really switch an Excadrill in that game until it like died, if I recall correctly. And he like you got rocks up on turn one, and they basically never went off the field.
Yeah.
And I think that if he's trying to win versus you, he does have to play the hazards game and play very aggressively to keep those rocks off the field, particularly just given the fact that they neuter his team to a very significant degree. Dragonite really hates the rocks on the field. Gyarados hates the rocks on the field. Latios certainly doesn't like them. I think that's, in terms of the specific things, I think he could have put up a much better fight against you in that second game where you did sort of roll him, if he had opted into that kind of play a little more. But I think that that's kind of the biggest theme that I want to talk about, is that like he does play decently. Like he doesn't play badly by any means.
Yeah.
But it's just like small sort of strategic points, like sort of a misidentification of his win conditions and his opponent's win conditions, and just like generally not getting as much mileage out of his Pokemon as he could be.
Yeah. And these are really like high level concepts that kind of apply to everyone playing Pokemon, and I'm not going to fault him for not being an excellent Pokemon player, but that just really goes to show that, like, given the Pokemon that he had, he could have he did have a solid shot at winning almost every game. And it was more on the strategical aspects and just getting experience, getting playing reps, to be able to make the right plays.
Yeah. I think that that's one of the biggest things for him going forward, is on like with his next draft that he gets, take it into the ladder in Gen 6, because I think we're actually going to be able to take those into the ladder much more reasonably than we were these Gen 5 teams.
Yeah.
So
there's not really as many overbearing forces on the meta, at least from my evaluation. But I think like the other theme that I noticed, at least with a lot of his wins, because obviously he lost both games to you and both games to me. That means he had a 7-3 record versus the rest of the field, which is very good. So
I would expect 9-0 with his draft, or 10-0 with his draft, or maybe 9-1 given some luck.
Yeah.
So
but it's um, he did a pretty good job against them. But yeah, some of those losses are questionable. But like, I think. And I think I used this term earlier tonight, but I was just like he kind of smacks them with his wallet. In this case, good draft picks. Just out talenting the enemy team.
Yeah,
Latios literally can just click Dragon Pulse and like take out a lot, like 50, like 5 out of 6 mons on most people's teams. Four out of 6 at a if they're prepared. Like
that's definitely what he did against Max in
yeah,
game one.
yeah. Um, if you don't have a rock solid steel type, like it's gonna be hard to deal with that top. Like he's just gonna roll over. Latios is. He's gonna roll over a lot of teams. He
Yeah,
doesn't even need that much support. Luckily, he had a lot of support with the Magnezone, which applied a lot of pressure in, at least to me, because, like I it was hard to play Skarmory. I mean, I forgot to take Shed Shell one game, but like it still applies pressure to Latios's definite best answer. Um, Second best answer was would have been like fat special walls like Blissey and Chansey, which put in a lot of work and whenever they were brought versus him. You don't have a really strong fighting type. Your best fighting move is probably like superpower on Darmanitan, right? Like
yeah. I mean, I don't think you necessarily need it. He does have powerful physical attackers.
yeah. Um
Honestly, one thing I would have really liked to have seen him bring in a lot more matchups is the Sword Stance Excadrill, because that can be really scary versus a lot of teams. There are a lot of teams here that have Pokemon that really hate switching into a Sword Stance Ironhead or Earthquake. I personally have sort of fallen in love in laddering on bulky Swords Dance Excadrill just because it takes so many hits
yeah.
and it gets the Swords Dance off, and all of a sudden it's massively threatening.
Mm-hmm. I I think that there was kind of a lack of flexibility in a lot of his team building. Like he would occasionally bust out some tech like the Scarf Gyarados in one of his last games, but I think throughout a lot of the season Daniel would kind of resort to just like this same configuration, and we joked about it, like it's just the 5 mons with one of the bulky waters. It's like Slowbro or Darmanitan or Bisharp, or Milotic, and just that same starting 5, and they are good Pokemon, but they aren't the most complementary. Like Gyarados doesn't really benefit a lot from having a Magnezone. Um, Excadrill doesn't synergize super well with like uh Latios. I don't know. They are good Pokemon,
Yeah,
and their talent will win
well,
you a lot of games. But
yeah.
it's. I would have liked to have seen more adaptive team building, and I get that there's out of game factors of impacting that, but that doesn't mean that you can't play better or be better.
He has the worst out of game factor impacting that.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like
um,
it's fair, but it's
yeah,
not that good of an excuse.
yeah. Um, but we all have lives.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah, are there any games that you want to talk about in specific? I think you said I kind of rolled him in the second game, but it was still only a 2 Pokemon victory. Granted, it didn't really feel like one of the like it wasn't really a close
Yeah.
two game differential, but like
Like sometimes there's
he
a
still
two
got
game
Pokemon.
differential. Yeah, you get Pokemon. Sometimes there's a 2 game differential where it's like, oh, both players had chances to win in this game. It didn't really feel like that. I do. He did adapt halfway through the season and start bringing the bulky waters package, the
Yeah,
both Slowbro and Milotic. I like that. I think that's decent. Especially, it makes his team a lot easier to play. But yeah, I think that really it's without doing like a really big deep dive into each game and talking about like very specific turns, it's hard to identify massive, just systematic strategic errors that he makes,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Which is a good thing, right? Like that means that he's on a different level than most of the other players here.
yeah. There
I think,
aren't very many big like huge misplays, like we said. Sorry.
yeah, I think that he doesn't really know how to use setup moves well. In fact, he almost never uses setup
Yeah,
moves. I think that would be a good way to really squeeze a lot more out of your Pokemon. He also tends to switch, like get his Pokemon crippled like early in a game. Like he'll just get like his Gyarados or his Latios toxic or burned for no real good reason, just because it seems like he's not really thinking. Uh, and I say that that's maybe the biggest strategic error off the top of my head that he goes through a lot. But I think that he really just needs to do a better job at drafting and then kind of get in the lab and play for himself to really be able to squeeze out, first of all, stop dropping games to the rest of the league, and then maybe squeeze out wins against us too. And I think that if he can do that, then all of a sudden certainly the closest to being a contender
Yeah,
of the entire league. So
yeah, yeah. Um, I had to do a lot of prep for my games, to just like luckily I had the tools to be able to beat him, but if I didn't, I would have had to make the trade because it's threatening. Um, but yeah, and like moving towards that draft, like what did you see as major misses from him? Because to me, before we get into like specific options, I think like he but going into the season, I didn't say much, but I think given his roster's like raw talent level, when you make like because they don't synergize well, I think he could have been like he could have had a cash cow for trades. Like I'm not going to say specific offers, but there were Pokemon that he could have traded and gotten a big return on investment because they like for Pokemon that work better for him, you know. Um
I think Excadrill is the
yeah.
the
Yeah.
easy identifier there. But the thing is, you do need to get a spinner in return.
Yeah.
Um, so it's like you
And not
potentially trade
Starmie.
him to Elijah for Starmie plus some good Pokemon.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Maybe Celebi.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. There's actually not that many good fits, so you have to get creative. Potentially bring in a third
I th-
team. I think that's something that it hasn't been done yet. Like
yeah.
trades in general are something that are generally underutilized across the league. So
Yeah.
you know,
I also think like if you look like he has two bulky waters, you don't need both of those on your team. I mean, they both are good, so you can give it to someone who lacks a good bulky water, which I mean, granted they are kind of common, but like you can give it to someone who needs a better one, maybe give up Milotic, and get a different, just a better type graph for your team. You know, you don't want two waters if you don't have to have
I
them.
think that maybe the easiest Pokemon to identify for like as a trade candidate is Gyarados to
Yeah,
me,
yeah,
because you can actually
it's really
probably
valuable. A lot of teams I
yeah.
think would be interested. Um, and it's kind of a redundant role in your team. You already have a good Dragon Dancer and probably a better one for most matchups.
I think it's really 50. I think it is 50-50.
Yeah,
I think that Gyarados is very threatening in a lot of matchups, so I understand wanting to keep it, but I
yeah,
think, if you are relying on mid-season trades to fix up your roster, then you did make a mistake in
sure,
the
sure.
drafting process, though.
I mean, I think there's an argument given the average drafting level of our league that if you just want to get a bunch of talent and then later trade for fit, it's something that can be done. But if you don't want to willingly give up, all the
That
available
was my
talent
plan,
to someone
honestly.
like you, or yeah,
My Pokemon fit like decently well together,
yeah,
but I was really hoping to just get rid of the depth and acquire
yeah,
essentially T-Tar Excadrill was the plan.
yeah,
But it was just like nope, under no circumstances. So
right,
it is a good plan, but yeah, I think the main thing I would have liked to have seen is a third dragon. Whether I think that the specific one I would have liked, because I'm pretty sure that this Pokemon went in like the 7th or 8th round. Kyurem Black would be so scary on Daniel's team because it's just
yeah,
another essentially like uncounterable threat that he has in addition to the Latios and like the big threats to that Pokemon are the Steel types, right? And he does have the Magnezone to deal with that. So, I would have liked to have seen that. You got to embrace. He was going for the Drag Mag strategy, but he didn't really embrace the identity
Yeah.
which is a hyper offense team fundamentally,
Mhm. Yeah.
and he sort of drafted for balance more.
And I think that's just a play style that's more comfortable for him and like how he sees the game. And,
Yeah,
that's
I mean
fair.
balance is definitely much easier than hyper offense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like so,
It
hyper offense is a
requires a lot
story we
of,
could go into.
yeah, it's scary. It requires a lot of hard, I mean, not necessarily hard reads, but you have to be willing to make sacrifices to to keep momentum and keep your foot on their neck. And that's
And you also got to
for
be
someone
willing to
who's,
get crushed in games
yeah, yeah.
because it's a crush or be
Um,
crushed strategy. Really.
yeah. And sometimes crushing them means like winning 2-0, or winning by 2 Pokemon because you just sacked until you got the right one in the
Yeah, two
perfect
Pokemon
position
by
to win.
18 turns.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so that's like a paradigm shift from the way a lot of people play Pokemon or learn it coming into competitive, right? So I get not being able to play that to its full extent, but um, if you want to take most advantage of two really fast setup, like a great setup sweeper, a great setup sweeper, and then one of the best just outright attackers ever, then you're gonna have to play some offense. You're gonna have to be willing to make trades and just take advantage of what they bring to your team. Um,
The big
yeah.
thing that Daniel was lacking was a good rock setter. Like
Hmm.
Excadrill as your primary rock setter is really bad, just to be
Yeah, it's
honest.
not
Like that
great.
one has 4 move slot syndrome, like some of the worst. Like it has a lot of moves that it wants to be running. And if it's forced to run stealth rock, then it's just generally very unhappy.
Yeah. Um, Not having a great so like if you're going to play balance, you definitely need to spin, and I think in his play a lot of hazards were neglected. Um, so if you're going to play balance, you got to play it right, and you gotta get up the hazards, and not having a rock setter for that, and not prioritizing getting your own up is not gonna it's not gonna turn out well for you.
Yeah. So that's something I'd like to see early on is getting like if you want to do the hype, whether you want to no actually no matter what strategy you're doing, get a good hazard setter. Like good hazard setter are 100% worth
They're broken.
picks in the first
Hazards are
three
broken.
rounds. Yeah,
Um, I think like so this is something he did really well in season 1 was just being able to have an identity and stick to it. Now it's helpful that that identity is like the identity of Rain in Gen 4 is very obvious. You take the mons with Swift Swim and you take the mons that click Rain Dance good and you just kind of run with it. Hyper offense is kind of something that I don't even know if he recognized that he should have been playing, you know. Um
yeah.
and so
Honestly, a Pokemon that I would have potentially liked to have seen is a Frostlass. Like Frostlass
yeah,
could maybe put in some work because it's basically guaranteed to get up 2 layers of spikes.
yeah,
The only issue is that generally you probably want the rocks more, but you don't have Ferrothorn, so
yeah.
obviously Ferrothorn would be amazing, but it was taken
Yeah.
very early. So
Yeah. Um I think yeah, just being able to play like a suicide lead just in general, like you could have done Forretress, you could have done a lot of these Pokemon. You got Forretress, but I think it was pretty late, like back
yeah, that
half
was
of the
one of my
draft.
last picks for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I think is there anything else in terms of draft that you would like to see? Just stick to your identity, identify it, and stick to it.
I mean, have a better idea of what a good Pokemon is and what one isn't. If I recall correctly, like basically after your fifth pick, like you were only picking UU Pokemons, Daniel, and it's not like the pool of OU Pokemons was so shallow that you needed to do that. So
Yeah. Um Crobat's in there. Crobat's not good.
Crobat might have gone like fifth or sixth for him.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
crazy.
It's because he lost that one game in season 1 to Ethan off of it. But yeah, I don't really have anything in particular else to say about the draft in terms of play. Get reps, you don't make a lot of game losing errors. Probably like less than anyone except for myself and Ethan. So your play's not awful. But maybe be really more willing to take risks. I've lauded taking Draco over Dragon Pulse Pump over Surf very many times to you, and that's just Pokemon. There's always hacks. You can't get rid of it. So just be willing to take risks that are favorable to you.
Yeah.
Is my advice.
That's definitely something I noticed in Daniel's play is that yeah, he makes the safe play a lot, and sometimes the
From the
safe
team
play,
builder to the end game, like
yeah.
across the board.
And I understand wanting to make the safe play, but Pokemon is a not necessarily a game that is about always making the safe play. It's not like chess or League of Legends. You have to take big risks sometimes, and because sometimes you take a risk and like the payoff is like you win the game basically on the spot,
Yeah,
and then the downside is you lose this mon and it might be important, right? But
yeah,
just need to be able to identify that. I really only saw like one big read or prediction from you, and it was when you predicted the Landorus switch
yeah. I
as
was gonna point
the
that out
Magnet
too.
Zone. That was a great
And
play,
you
but
almost won the game off of it. It ended up being a close game.
yeah. So
Uh,
you know, you're all brains, not enough cock and balls.
yeah. And so I think that's what we're on the video. Who do you want to do next? Are you interested in anyone? Because the regular season is over now. We can do anyone.
So we've done last place, first place, third place. Well,
Yeah.
I'd like to go through over Elijah or Otto next.
Okay. Let's do Elijah next.
All right,
And we'll be coming back for episode 4 with that. Thank you.
all right. Thank you guys.